If you're having trouble getting started with your no-code app or building any initial traction, or really just having trouble taking what seems like a really big and complex idea and actually extracting that from your head and turning it into a development and launch plan, if you're having trouble doing any of those things, then this is the video for you. Now, first off, you're not alone. We have lots of entrepreneurs come to us and say that they're having trouble getting started because they have this app idea, but it feels overwhelming. It feels complicated. They don't have technical backgrounds. They've never launched an app or an app-based business before. And so they don't really know how to make quick and consistent traction with us. So if you feel the same way, you're not alone, but we are going to walk through this so that you can leave with a plan of action on how to really start generating traction and momentum with your app. Now, make sure you stick around until the end because we're going to go over some initial concepts and some initial ways that you can look at this and kind of move forward with your app. But we're also going to do a breakdown of LinkedIn. Now, everybody knows what LinkedIn is. You probably already use it, but we're actually going to look at the evolution of LinkedIn's development and launch plan over years of time so you can see how a really successful company has done this as well. So make sure you stick around for that. Now, first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, where we help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to either start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses, all without coding and with no technical background required. So let's dive into this because this is a really, really important topic. And I'm going to share my screen here so we can go through it. So if you are like most entrepreneurs, most non-technical founders who are coming into the app development space for the first time, you've never launched an app, or you've at least never successfully been able to launch and grow an app-based business. If you're coming into this space and you're trying to get started, you might be feeling like your app idea is really, really big. It's really expansive. It's really complicated because you've been thinking about it and planning it and researching for it for probably a long time now. Probably years. I mean, we've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs who have had their app ideas for over a decade before they actually started building out those apps. And so if you've been just mulling on this idea for that long, then once you actually take that first step to really get started with it, it can feel like, almost impossible to even know which direction to go. That, of course, is very overwhelming. It's very, very overwhelming, and it's very, very intimidating. So what we see happen with a lot of people is, they have this big app idea like we talked about. And then when they start trying to put it down onto paper, or, that figuratively speaking, when they start trying to put it onto a screen, or when they really just start trying to extract it from their minds, they start to feel overwhelmed really early on because it's really hard to take this big picture, long-term kind of big vision goal that you have and actually find a starting point. And this is true no matter what you are trying to accomplish, whether it's, launching a successful app or something else. When you are thinking about that end goal that you're trying to achieve, having the business that allows you to leave your career, for example, or having this additional revenue stream, or being able to support your family, or whatever it is, if that's kind of that end thing that you're thinking about, then it can be next to impossible to find the right starting point without feeling overwhelmed, without feeling intimidated. And intimidated too. Now, a lot of people don't necessarily say the word intimidated. They don't talk about feeling intimidated, but I'm using this word because another thing that I have found to be true is that when you are trying to find that starting point, and when you are starting to do more and more research about actually building out this app idea that you have and launching it, you start to see, or you start to pay attention to, more apps on the market that are already out there, and you start comparing yourself to where they are now. So you start thinking about how you are just in this idea stage. You're seeing these other apps that are, pristine and perfect and have thousands or millions of users, and you start to feel intimidated. So it's this overwhelming feeling about getting started, and this intimidating feeling about, will you even be able to do this? Will you even be able to get to the point of having this business or having this thing that allows you to really change your life, right? So, with all of that being said, first, you can do this, right? You can do it. This is a question a lot of people ask. Can I even get to that point? I don't have a technical background. I'm new to this space. I'm new to using no code tools. Can I even do this? You can do it, and we're going to talk about how. How do I even start? And how do I prioritize which steps I take? Right? Those are a lot of common questions that we get. So that's what we're going to talk about now. And then we're going to dive into kind of breaking down how LinkedIn has done this. Okay, let me move my face over here. So what I want you to do is picture this square right here on the screen as being your entire app, your full scope app. So that really big idea, that big vision, that long-term kind of idea that you have been thinking up for years now, that all fits into the box that you see on your screen. Okay. Now, when you start to ask the question of, first, am I even going to be able to accomplish this? Usually, what I find to be the case is you are thinking about being all the way up at the top here, which we're going to say is kind of like having that full scope app, that really big vision that you've imagined. Most people think about being here. They say, can I even really do this? Because they're looking at, other apps out there on the market. They're trying to extract that idea from their head, and they're thinking, is this possible for me? They're thinking about being right here. When you think about being right there, when in reality, right now, you're down here, right? So you are in this 0 mile per hour zone right now, and you're thinking about being in this 100 mile per hour zone. It's impossible not to feel overwhelmed or intimidated. It's impossible not to feel like this mission you're setting out on is maybe a little bit impossible, because you're at 0 miles per hour right now and you want to be at 100 miles per hour, right? So you're only thinking about that long-term goal. It's really hard to do that. It's really hard to make progress when you're doing that. So what I want you to do instead is think about, if this square is your entire app, think about breaking it down into a bunch of different layers. Okay, so one of the questions we get a lot is, how do I prioritize my development? How do I know what to start with? Because, you have this we'll call it your 100 mile per hour idea, right? You have that full scope vision. But how do you break it down into a bunch of little granular priorities or steps or development stages, whatever you want to call them? How do you make it so that building and launching your app actually feels like a process of building up momentum rather than trying to go from 0 to 100 in, under 5 seconds or whatever? Well, what you need to do is kind of plan backwards. And this is something that we do with all of our clients. It's what we do with our own business. This is what we do, whether it's with an app or not, with anything you're trying to accomplish, anything that is going to take time, that's a bigger project. We plan backwards. So you think about that 100 mile per hour idea, what you want it to look like, and then you start kind of working your way backwards and peeling out different layers of that idea. So, maybe you have 10 different problems that you're trying to solve with your full scope app, and you have several different user types and you have lots of different feature sets, and maybe you have a community and maybe you have 5 different pricing tiers and whatever it may be. We'll start to peel off layers of that so that you can work your way back kind of down to this starting point. And then you can start building and testing and launching your app in those layers versus trying to think about doing everything at the same time. Now, that's all good and well, of course. It's easy to say that, to tell you to kind of break the app down into segments. But how do you actually do it? Well, what I would encourage you to do, and this is a really big one, think about your immediate goals versus your long-term goals. So when you're up here in this 100-mile-per-hour zone where you have your full scope app, you're thinking about having a scaled business, right? You're thinking about having really increased revenues for your business. You're thinking about transitioning your lifestyle so that you can maybe step away from your career and have something that you control, that you own, right? Whatever, everybody is different. So you can put whatever you want there, but those are your long-term goals. Okay. You really have to start thinking about your immediate goals if you want to make any real traction a lot more quickly with your app and with your business. Now, immediate goals are a lot more granular and a lot more attainable, at least again in the immediate. But these immediate goals will eventually lead to those longer term goals up here. So, with any app, what we would look at as being immediate goals is having your first users, for example, having your first test users, your first beta users, just having outside hands on the app, right? That's an immediate goal. And we don't even have to put a number of users on there yet. We could just say, 5. I'm just using that as an example. That's a not intimidating number. But think about when you're at that 0 mile per hour zone, when you're at the very beginning and you're trying to really just get started with your app in the first place. Well, think about what your most immediate goals are. Your most immediate goal might be to just have that functioning core product that solves one problem for one user type, right? And then, maybe as you work your way up, you want to have your first 10 users, or maybe it's your first 100 users, depending on your app and your market and that type of thing. As you work your way up, maybe it's adding your very initial pricing tier or option. As you work your way up, maybe it's having your first 50 paying users, right? As you work your way even farther up, maybe it's now going part-time on your regular job and part-time on your app, right? And we kind of work our way up higher and higher and higher until we're actually at that 100-mile-per-hour zone. Now, all of these kind of segmented goals over on the left side here, these will depend on you and these will depend on your app. But if you start by thinking about what that 100-mile-per-hour goal or vision or app looks like for you, then you can start really practically breaking that down into different layers. Now, I say goals and not features, for example, or anything really technical with the app, because your goals will dictate what you are technically working on in the app. So, for example, if one of your most immediate goals is just to solve one main problem for one main user type, well, that's automatically going to tell you what features you need in that first version of your app. If any of the features that you have in mind for that 100-mile-per-hour version are not related to that first problem or that first user type, well, then you can save them for later, right? So just having that goal alone will help you understand what technical components to prioritize with the app. And then as you work your way up, again, these goals depend on you and what your end goal is. But If your goal is just to have 10 initial users, well, chances are you really don't need to focus on a lot of your 100-mile-per-hour features, right? So that's already going to help dictate what features you need in the app if you're only looking to have 10 users on board quite yet. And then when you add in, your pricing, for example, that's also going to make it really clear about what you need to focus on from a technical standpoint. And it's going to go like that all the way up. But it starts by getting yourself away from just thinking about this 100-mile-per-hour goal that you have, where you're feeling overwhelmed and intimidated and wondering if you'll actually ever be able to do this. It starts by, yes, knowing what it is for you, what that looks like for you, but then moving away from it and getting down to this 0-mile-per-hour starting point so that you can start thinking more clearly. You can start thinking more practically. You can start prioritizing in a really logical way. And so you can actually start building consistent momentum with your app where you're not constantly thinking, oh my gosh, I'm trying to get my first 10,000 users on board and I haven't even launched my first version yet, right? If you're thinking too big or you're thinking past the point or where your immediate goals lie, you're going to feel overwhelmed. It's just going to be hard to build traction. Now, I'm not telling you not to think big or not to aim high with your app. Remember, we're already doing that at the start because that's probably where you're at right now. But we need to step away from it so that you can have a clear head and you can start thinking more practically and logically. Okay. So again, think about your app being in this entire box. That's your full app. At the bottom is your starting point. At the top is that end goal that you want to achieve. Think about what your end goal is and then plan backwards so that you can segment that app up into these different layers and work your way back up to that big picture goal that you have. Okay, so that's how I want you to think about this and kind of get to a place where you're not feeling so overwhelmed, you're not feeling intimidated, you're not feeling like, this might be impossible for you, because you definitely can do this. This is certainly achievable to build and launch your app successfully. You can do it. You just have to think about it logically. So what I want to do next is now go through an example of LinkedIn. So again, everybody knows what LinkedIn is. You're probably using LinkedIn. Now, I found this timeline of LinkedIn from when LinkedIn was very first founded in 2002, all the way up to 2017. So this is kind of the evolution of LinkedIn. And I found this on officetimeline.com. Now, caveat here, I'm not a LinkedIn expert, and so I don't know how accurate this exact timeline is. From what I have read, it looks pretty accurate, but it doesn't really matter for the sake of this example. Even if some of this is a little bit off, it's going to apply no matter what. Okay, so keep in mind what we just went over, going from 0 miles per hour to 100 miles per hour. So if we look over here on the left, we have LinkedIn being founded in 2002. Okay, and now over here on the right, we have 2017. Now, we know we're obviously past 2017 at this point, and LinkedIn has continued to grow. But let's just say, for the sake of this example, that this is that kind of big picture goal for LinkedIn. Okay, and in 2017, this was kind of true, right? This is what they were working up for. But we'll kind of look at this as the bottom, or the 0 mile per hour, and the top, or the 100 mile per hour. Okay. So if we look back in 2002, now this is really important here. LinkedIn was founded in December of 2002, and it was launched in May of 2003. So we're looking at less than half of a year between when it was founded and when it was launched. Now, the reason why this is so important is because we see so many entrepreneurs stuck in their planning stages for, a year or more. Just in their planning stages. They're not even touching the technical side of their app yet, or even taking that next step, we see a lot of them who are actually starting to work on their apps, but maybe they've been working on their apps for over a year or over a year and a half or over 2 years. We've seen this before, and they've never brought a user on it before because they're just kind of tinkering away. They're working up to that 100-mile-per-hour vision, but without having any layers in between or any goals in between. So they're kind of trying to do everything at once. But look at what the founders of LinkedIn did. They founded it and they launched it in less than half a year. Okay. So they moved really quickly because, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience here and my own knowledge, but they moved really quickly because they knew that they didn't need to launch the 2017 version in order to just get started building initial traction, right, with the business, with LinkedIn. They knew that they could just launch and reach their most immediate goal, solving their first core problem for that first core user. They know they could do that quickly. And if they could do that, and if they could actually start getting those initial users on board, they could continue expanding and building traction from there. But this time, doing it, or at that point, doing it with real users on board. And that gives you a lot of urgency and a lot of reason to move forward in a really quick way with your app. So we're looking at a really short time frame from founding to launching. And then if you look here in 2005, to my knowledge, this is when LinkedIn first started monetizing their platform. So they launched in 2003, and then they launched LinkedIn business accounts and LinkedIn for groups in 2005, where they started charging users to have these different account types. Now, again, I could be a little bit off with this, but let's just pretend this is true if it isn't already for the sake of this example. So they launched these different types of accounts in 2005. They launched the platform in 2003. So what were they doing during this time right here? Well, I'll tell you what I would bet they were doing. I would bet that they were, number one, I know that they were getting, funding and investment and that type of thing. But thinking on a smaller scale, because I know that a lot of entrepreneurs in this space are just looking to create their own businesses and not necessarily these massive online empires. So scaling this down a little bit, one of the biggest things they were doing during that time is they were just refining and optimizing that initial core product that they built for that initial core problem and those initial core users. They were taking feedback, they were improving the product, they were refining it, they were iterating. They were doing that until they got to a point where they said, okay, we have honed in on our users' needs and we have iterated enough. Now we're going to introduce these new accounts and we're going to be able to charge and start monetizing this. Okay, so in this section here, we're looking at a lot of feedback, and that is one of those earlier, more granular segmented goals when you're looking at going from that 0 miles per hour to 100 miles per hour. There are lots of points in there in each of those layers where you should be focusing on feedback. But remember that you have to have users to get the feedback. Right? The feedback is the most important thing to helping you be able to grow and evolve the app and improve the app. But you have to have users to get that feedback. You don't have to have tons of users. You can start small. Remember, we're going from 0 miles per hour to 100. You can start small, but going through these phases is really, really important. Okay, so now thinking even farther out. So a lot of entrepreneurs, again, they try to build the full app in one go. They try to fill that full square that we talked about all in one go. And it involves lots and lots and lots of different feature sets, functionality, different problems that they're solving, even different user types, all of it in one go. Well, look at what LinkedIn did here in 2007. So years after they launched, they finally introduced a feature where you can see who has viewed your profile. Now, that seems like a really basic feature, But they held off on creating that feature until years after they had launched, because what they were doing was getting feedback on the initial core product for their initial core user before expanding and moving out to those what we like to call nice to have features. Your nice to have features are things that will make the user's experience better. It'll make using the app maybe more convenient or more enjoyable or easier in some way, but they're not mission critical to actually moving up through those different layers of the app where you're bringing on users, you're getting the feedback, right? They're not actually critical to that. And you can see that that's very, very true. When you look at how LinkedIn didn't launch a feature like this until years after they had launched, right? They didn't even start having their first profitable month until 2006, right? So you can see that there are a lot of layers here. And we're not even halfway through this timeline here. There are lots and lots of little layers. And at every single point along the way here, they're getting feedback. That's why you're seeing all these features or all these kind of new things in the timeline. That's why you're seeing them more spread out, is because they're actually taking time to get feedback on those features too. They're not launching all at once. They're getting feedback to see what works, what isn't working, what they can improve, what they couldn't change, all the things, and then actually taking the action to implement the feedback. And that's another point a lot of people miss is first, maybe they're not getting the feedback in the first place because they're not, segmenting out the development and the launch. They're not creating the layers, but then they're not taking the time to implement the feedback. And instead, they're just thinking about the next steps or that 100-mile-per-hour zone. But sometimes you have to spend more time in those earlier layers so that you can actually implement the feedback and improve and expand and evolve the app. Now, if you look even later on, in September of 2008, LinkedIn started offering advertising. Now, if you think about LinkedIn as a whole, it was initially a platform for people to connect for business purposes, for recruiters to find people to fill open roles within companies, and for regular people to kind of put up an online resume. But at this point in time, LinkedIn is so much more. LinkedIn is a place still for businesses and employees to go online, but there are groups, there are lots of more, there are a lot more social components of LinkedIn now than there were before. There's lots of advertising, so businesses are making money on LinkedIn now. There are lots of businesses who are creating profiles on LinkedIn just so that they can kind of spread the word about their own business, whether they're hiring or not. It might not have anything to do with them hiring, but they're using it as a platform to create content and to kind of create a brand and a message around their business. I mean, it's so much more, and it has evolved over time. So if the founders were thinking from the very start, how do I build this platform where people can come on and businesses can find employees, and employees can find new jobs, and we can have people advertising, and we can have people building their consulting businesses, and we can have people producing content. And if the founders had thought about building that, they would have never launched. It would have never happened. It would have been impossible. They would have had that overwhelming feeling, that intimidated feeling, and thought, we're never going to be able to do it, right? But they reined it way in, and they created all the layers. So again, if we're looking through all of this time, feedback. The feedback is what is helping them create all the new features. Apply with LinkedIn, endorsements, influencer program, updates ad service or sponsored updates ad service. All of these are those little layers that we're talking about. But I guarantee you that each of these features was dictated by a specific goal that LinkedIn had. Some accomplishment that they wanted to make. Look, you can see also over here in yellow, right? They're expanding in China. They have an international headquarters in Dublin. They have an office in India. They have 10 million users here. They have 500 million users over here. So each of, you can think of each of those little yellow sections that you see on the screen as all of those goals that we talked about. If I scroll back up here on the left-hand side, all of these goals that you have, you can kind of think of these yellow sections as being those goals, and all of these red circles here as all the technical components being influenced by the goals, right? So again, this is a really good example of taking that big picture view, that 100-mile-per-hour view, and just peeling off the layers until you get to the very core and then starting there. Now, this big picture view over here is the thing that guides you as you move forward. So you don't lose sight of it, but you have to step away from it so that you can clear your head, think logically, think practically. So this big picture is kind of like your North Star that's guiding you with your development, with your launch plan, with your testing, with all of these things, right? But you just have to break it back down. You have to kind of rein it in so that you can move forward with a lot more clarity. Because again, what we hear so many entrepreneurs saying is that they are, I know this is getting messy here, but they are way up here and they can't step away from it. And because of that, they can't think clearly, they can't make decisions, they are feeling intimidated and stressed and overwhelmed all the time. And they're feeling, analysis paralysis. They just can't move forward. They can't even take the first step, much less, the ones that are going to get them all the way up here, right? So I would encourage you to think about it this way. If you are getting started with your app, maybe you haven't started yet because of all these reasons, or you're finding it hard to move forward with consistency, you're finding it hard to move forward and build traction, I really encourage you to think in this way. Step away from that big picture, break it down into more segmented, granular steps, and then work your way back up. It's going to take a lot of pressure off, and it's going to actually allow you to move forward with a lot of clarity. So I hope that was helpful for you. Now, if you want to take the next steps, or if you want even a more in-depth kind of guided process to getting started strategically with your app, or at least making sure that you're moving forward in the right direction if you already have started, we have a training that goes really in depth on kind of strategically taking these first steps with your app, figuring out how to prioritize your different feature sets. So it kind of takes this conversation just a lot further. If you want to join in on that, you can head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop, and you can sign up for that. It's completely free, and that'll be really helpful for you as well. So again, I hope you found this helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.